It would be an understatement to say that Britain and the US's relationship got off to a rocky start. After all, in 1812, Britain and America were at war, but just over a century later, they were fighting shoulder to shoulder in World War I. This obviously raises the question, when did Britain and America become allies? There had to be a point where both went from actively disliking each other to working alongside each other. Now, it's important to note that even in the immediate aftermath of independence, America and Britain still had strong economic ties. This isn't to say that things were always great, and there were some pretty major conflicts of interest. The first and perhaps most obvious was the Monroe Doctrine, 1823, where the US declared an end to any new European colonial adventures in the Americas. For Britain, this was potentially a problem because it had huge economic interests in South America. In reality, it wasn't too much of a problem at all, because in 1833, Britain landed a force on the Falkland Islands and America did nothing. However, in 1842, the US did warn Britain against interference in Hawaii, which Britain did heed. This was because America's international power was certainly growing and its interests could no longer be ignored. This fact that America was a rapidly growing great power would dominate Anglo-American relations for the following century. So, the next major event which could have changed the dynamic was the American Civil War in 1861. Britain had already abolished slavery, so you would think they'd prefer the Union over the Confederacy, but you'd be wrong. Britain had no great affection for the Confederacy's slavery, but their preferential treatment was purely economic, mostly due to cotton imports. Britain did consider formally recognizing the Confederacy. Relations were severely harmed by the Trent Affair, where the US seized a ship carrying Confederate diplomats headed for Britain. In the end, cooler heads prevailed, and Britain didn't get involved. Although it did construct a very powerful warship, the CSS Alabama, for the Confederacy. After the Civil War was over, Britain paid compensation to the United States for the damages caused by the ship. Thus, only 50 years away from World War I, Britain and America still didn't really care much for each other. So what changed this? Relations actually started to improve during Britain's border dispute with Venezuela in 1895. This developed into a crisis, and the US intervened and arbitrated, surprisingly siding mostly with Britain. For Britain, America had conducted itself in a well-mannered fashion and given Britain most of what it had wanted. And for America, by accepting American arbitration, Britain had yielded its right to influence South America. The other reason for Anglo-American rapprochement was simple: converging interests. America emerged from its Civil War as a centralized industrial power, and after defeating Spain in 1898, it possessed a global empire too. For Britain, its global position was being threatened by Russia and the newly formed Germany. Thus, her most natural ally seemed to be the United States, since it was half a world away, had its own sphere of influence, and shared many values. It was at the turn of the 20th century, under President Theodore Roosevelt, that America and Britain really started to become friends, leading to a naval agreement that allowed Britain to move its fleet home to defend against Germany. Trusting the US with Caribbean security, this ensured US intervention in WWI.